Welcome to Green Crush. What day is it today? Well, I know it's Tuesday, and I know it's supposed to be 2:03, but we're a little bit late, like always. And it's going to be a good show today because we're going to get to some opioid discussion. We're going to get to some facts about opioids. Apparently there's a crisis going on. A crisis of unprecedented proportions. The government's trying to figure out what to do about it. They've got all kinds of great ideas buried and suppressed over the years. But they're trying to come up with a different thing now. They're trying to come up with, how can we stop the opioid crisis? What are we going to do about the opioid crisis? Who's responsible? No, they're not asking really who's responsible for the opioid crisis. And it's just a matter of adding more laws, I'm sure, at this point with these people. I'm sure that's all it is. Just have to add a few more laws. That'll fix everything in the opioid crisis. Welcome to Green Crush. What's Green Crush? Green is cannabis. Crush is what happens to cancer when you mix the two. And I know there's a lot of people saying that's not the case, and they're not all there. They're either ignoring the research or pretending it doesn't exist, or the third case scenario is perhaps they are upset about losing someone special to them who did not survive the cancer crush. And that's a human emotion that can take place sometimes. It goes back to when you're a little child, and if you're not allowed to use a toy and your mother takes it away from you, perhaps maybe you will break that toy so that your brother can't play with it too. You know, that sort of if I can't have it, nobody can have it attitude. I'm so sorry to say that. I know for a fact that does so exist in the world. And when you're dealing with things like cancer, people get particularly sensitive. I can absolutely sympathize that. I wish I was still knowing these things that I know now when my mother was ailing from pancreatic cancer. I wish I could bring to her some of the things and all of the things, the cannabis stuff. I wish I could have that done. But of course, that would mean to go back in time, and we can't do this. And I understand a lot of people they do get upset about losing a loved one, if particularly another person whom they may not care for some reason. Maybe they can't answer their points. Maybe they don't understand how to take in the data that's accurate, because it counters what they want to believe and have been told by the mainstream full of shit machine. So today on the show, I'm going to break down some of the opioid crisis for you. We will get to the rest of it later. I just simply can't do all of these in one show. But it's going to be a good one because I think you're going to learn a lot of things, and we should get to that right now. Today, let's start up the machine. It's Green Crush on the Eggplant Digital Network.
Break the law.
Of course, that's Paul Flynn. He's an MP from England. Hi, Paul. I hope you're listening again. You're the star of the show. The politician who tells the people to get on top of breaking the law and use cannabis on the steps of the UK Parliament. Just go there and light up and see what happens. A bunch of fascistic armband-wearing thugs want to take you away and stick you in a dark room and punish you. Is it starting to sound like a cartoon now? A little bit more than it has been in the past? These terrible people, these awful hippies doing this dark, dangerous drug that's going to ruin the world? I love the fact that cat's coming out of the bag right now about all of this. And it's been a bit of a nut ride so far. It still is. We've got a lot of legalization barriers to get over. Itself, legalization is quite the barrier unto itself. Just the name. Legalese is a difficult language for almost anyone to learn. That's why, like our guest last week, Harrison, you have to go to school and learn how to become a lawyer. But maybe I don't have 7 years to do that before I want to save my ass from a deadly disease. Well, if you're in that position, thanks for dialing us up. I want to get into a weird story. And you'll think, what the hell has that got to do with cancer and cannabis and this show and what I'm trying to listen to? I don't know how to cure myself with this. Well, I'm never going to teach you how to cure yourself because I don't even believe in the word per se, unless you're making jam or jellies. But I can help you render yourself inhospitable to disease. How does that sound? That sounds pretty good, right? So let me take you down a little weird tangent right now. This is kind of strange, that's for sure. We are now going to be discussing the American government in this moment. And this is something that was going on for quite a while, several weeks of notice that I managed to see was going on in Cuba regarding U.S. people in Cuba. It says, this is from back in August, but the saga has not been solved yet, and so it's still pretty interesting, is that one of the more bizarre stories was that the U.S. State Department officially confirmed 16 government employees were affected by health attacks in Cuba. The hell's a health attack? State Department spokesperson Heather Nuarte calmly explained the details, which are frankly quite stunning. And let's hear some of these details. Where is she at here? Are we going to get this? No, we're not going to get this? Oh, shoot bags. Okay, well, I'll tell you what she said. She said that although the mainstream media seems loath to cover this, that CBS News did some digging, discovering from a review of medical records that the American and Canadian diplomats in Cuba have been diagnosed with... Okay, let me go back a little bit, because I know there's a lot of people listening to the show with the tiniest of minds to sort of keep on a narrow scope, and they can't quite follow the plot, and they can't even argue their way out of the bag when they don't argue the plot. And you say, hey, well, what about this? What about these 3 pieces of information? And they go, oh, yeah, well, shut up. So to get past those people, let me just reset this. CBS News, mainstream news. Regular news, not a conspiracy. I don't know why a truthful thing coming up on a less than favorite page is rendered not true. I find that very strange. There's a lot of fishy websites out there, for sure. But if a fishy website puts out a true story, you have to analyze it case by case. So this is not a fishy website to those people that are so pent up about believing that only the mainstream can tell the truth. So if that's what you really believe, as opposed to them telling the truth sometimes, let me reset this. CBS News, mainstream news, did some digging, and they discovered from a review of medical records that the American and Canadian diplomats in Cuba have been diagnosed with mild traumatic brain injury and central nervous system damage after an apparent attack with a sonic weapon targeted at their homes. A sonic weapon. That's well, I used to think that was a boy band. But a sonic weapon is something that can actually disrupt vibratory. It's a series of vibrations that can actually disrupt the integrity of a being of matter, whether it's a house or a human being. And somehow or other down in Cuba, some American and Canadian diplomats have been getting tagged with this. The diplomats complain once again. Are you listening? This is CBS News. Now, I don't hold them to the highest standard in the world, and I think they've told a lot of lies, but this is verifiable and can be researched. And it's a mainstream alert for all you mainstream people that need it to be mainstream or it's not real. This is mainstream. Here we go. The diplomats complained about symptoms ranging from hearing loss and nausea to headaches and balance disorders, after the State Department said incidents, quote unquote, began affecting them beginning in late 2016, right around the election time of the United States. A number of diplomats have cut short their assignments in Cuba because of the attacks, which we don't hear about much on mainstream news. The source says American diplomats have also been subjected to other types of harassment, including vehicle vandalization, constant surveillance, and home break-ins. The State Department has not yet identified explicitly the source of the attack or what person or what entity might have carried it out. I mean, that is about as distant as you can get. They say Rex Tillerson told the reporters, that's the Secretary of the Secretary of State, he said, "We hold the Cuban authorities responsible for finding out who is carrying out these health attacks on not just our diplomats, but as you've seen now, there are other cases with other diplomats involved." And the Cuban government, of course, denied any involvement with the incident. And, we wish the diplomats well, but what exactly is going on in the world where governmental representatives such as diplomats from one country to the other can be tagged with, like, sonic weapons? I'll tell you where. In a world where these kinds of criminalities are just the order of the day. The order of the day. So now what we do have is we have the government of the United States, the government of Canada, the governments in Europe, several of them, I'm sure in England, all over the place. Hello, Australia and New Zealand. Are you also suffering from opioid addiction? Losing people? Well, isn't it funny that they keep trying to put it together how the opioid crisis is even taking place, why it's taking place, and what can be done to do about it, when meanwhile we have the answer right here and the government is particularly involved. So that would be what I would call an inconsistency.
This is an inconsistency. There is much to be considered. I must reevaluate.
Exactly. So what we're going to do is reevaluate, and just before we do, let's go to Paul Flynn again with his short message. Paul, coming in from Parliament in England. Paul always has the most sage advice. I've got it down into just 10 seconds here. Here we go.
To act in a way of civil disobedience.
That's what you got to do.
I would call on people to break the law and use cannabis.
That's exactly what's going on here. That's exactly what I'm calling for you to do, because it's really not fair that this stuff gets in the way of something that, as I was told recently, is a complete fiction. And it doesn't work at all. It's a fairy tale, this less than pointed individual told me. And online, of course, didn't have any ability to back it up with anything. But I understand people are playing a game. They either really are hurt and upset that someone of theirs has gone injured or has unfortunately passed away. But this is an opportunity for everyone to take advantage of something that does exist, that is so a medical helpful agent, because the government of the United States actually has cannabis on the Schedule 1, which means it's dangerous, but it's also bringing you no medical value, or so they say. But at the same time, they also hold patents, medical patents, on how successful it is. So, that right there is a bit of a contradiction, and I'm going to tell you exactly who is responsible for this. It's the drug companies. Is that some kind of genius assertion of mine? No, it's the people that make the thing that's unfortunately flooding the world, and it's the people that distribute the thing that's unfortunately flooding the world. Not the hillbilly who's using it somewhere in a trailer or anybody else in between. To use this stuff. It is their fault to use it, but are we not going after the manufacturers of these poisons? That needs to end. We definitely have to shut these people down.
Dazzling display of logic.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, so let's move into opioids. We're going to do opioids now, and opioids is the section where I say no to opioids, and all I had to do there was to put an N in front of the word opioid. It's really not a big deal. So let's get to it. Here we go. I'm going to dial this thing up here, and first of all, coming back to life is what a lot of people call it. But the near-death experience is undeniable. Whether you die and come back from life to life after dying is debatable, I'm sure. A lot of people can say yes and no to that. But it's not debatable that you can get very, very close to the edge. Very close. And the first time I did with this cancer, I've had some other, close to end-of-life experiences, but with the cancer, it was pretty scary, and second time the more so. And it changes your perception of things, like participating in ridiculous systems that are designed to suppress and limit, when really there's nothing in the way but your belief in a stupid idea, even if the stupid idea was ushered into existence by someone you think is taking care of your interests as an elected representative. But to get back to my point, things really do change up a lot when you take in the other side or get right up close to it. So, I want to hear some kinds of things that I'm talking about here for you to understand where I'm coming from. This is where, when you get right to the darn end of things, if you make it back, you have a different perspective, you have a different series of beliefs and understandings, and you may even have a different look. Who knows? But check this out.
Near-death experience. I've had several near-death experiences, but I had a recent one with cancer. I'm fine now. But after that kind of an experience, which took a couple of years to go through, you really don't fear anything anymore. You figure it's up to God anyway. If you're around or you're not around, and that's just the way it is. So I fear no one.
And he was chatting, and they were closing the place up and putting lights out and all that sort of thing. And I had this incredible experience of moving up into a misty sort of area, and then becoming aware that I was in a tunnel. And it was totally peaceful. It was a place of absolute compassion, of understanding, of no coercion to do anything at all. And I became aware actually that I wasn't me. I was a long tube with rounded ends, and this tunnel started to form around the mist. And as soon as I was aware of that,
there's another wave that went further out, and I knew if I didn't gather that back in and even it out in my body, that I was dying. And it was beyond my control. It rushed back in, and it was like a tsunami wave. It just kind of brought everything that I am with it. And it was like there was an open window in the back of my heart, and that my life force just rushed out the back of my heart.
And that's a particularly bizarre experience that I can share a similar series of experiences. I won't do it this show, but a lot of weird things happen. I remember when I was at one of my lowest points at home and just sliding on down to the point where I needed to take an emergency ambulance back to the hospital. After this is going into my second bout, I would just found this really cool thing to do that actually brought an incredible amount of comfort. So I'll share it with you now. If you're in a lot of pain and you're having a tough time, even with cannabis or not, or whatever you're using, is you get into the fetal position and you listen to some very vibratory music, and by that I mean the vibrations. You should be concerned with the hertz and the vibrations, and you should try to find a vibration frequency that seems to tingle your skin while you're lying there. This could take a while. It could be 528 hertz, could be 432 hertz. Fiddle around with them. There's a lot of them on YouTube. And while you listen to that, you're in the fetal position, and I was just rocking ever so slowly, just rocking and rocking just the slightest bit, and this would create some kind of sensation of movement that took me into a place where I was able to self-hug if you will. If I was able to take care of it's just like when you hum and it feels good, and you're just warming up. It had a sensation of comfort. And I don't know why that seemed to help me at all, but it did. And so you may want to try it. But just before we get to the next section, I will tell you that we broadcast every single week at 2:03, and we're always a little bit late, 234 King Street East in Toronto in the downtown region at the beautiful Pacific Junction Hotel with all kinds of great food and coffee and drinks. Bring your friends, come after work, have a party, and learn what goes on here at the studios where we do Green Crush and a lot of other great shows as well. So, the opioid crisis. Everybody's bitching and moaning about it, and the same people in the government that are trying to delay and obfuscate rolling in these democratically preferred changes in decriminalization of a free substance that grows as a plant outside are full of shit. The people who are getting involved with this opioid crisis are not paying attention to the fact that it is so. The drug companies that are making this happen. And what I like about this is that a lot of people have criticized what I have done and been able to extend and keep on living with my cancerous life that was supposed to, and guaranteed to have, by the way, twice, killed me. And the reason I was able to get by that is because I don't tend to believe everything that doctors say. And there's a lot of you out there that say, you should listen to your doctor. You're being irresponsible giving out this kind of advice. Go back to the show and shows where I explained. I was given 0 options, okay? So why people who take the time to get angry enough to send in a letter conveying their stupidity and ignorance about how none of this works? Why is it that they don't go back and listen to the other shows and understand where I'm coming from before they take off and attack? Well, because they don't have the time and they don't have the desire. They just want to attack. The haters, they're not all that bright. They're not all that bright at all, but I do wish them the best of luck, because if they're able to turn things around, when later, if they get sick, and the chances are good, it's 1 in 2. This isn't a threat. I'm just citing statistics. 1 in 2 now for cancer patients. Out of the rest of us, the half of us here will get this disease. And if you don't get it, you're going to be dealing with someone who is. So why would you stupidly, close-mindedly turn off a full option of what can work, what does work, what has worked, and what I have documentation for working, and yet you sit there on your keyboards and chirp out that this is all impossible? What a crazy life you must lead. Anyway, let's get to the opioids, and what we're going to do here is we're going to listen to the expert, and you'll hear who the experts are as soon as we get going. Here's a little piece. I'm going to bring it to you, thankfully, from Fair Use. This is Fair Use of the show 60 Minutes, once again on CBS. I've got them on some kind of a pedestal this week, don't I? CBS is doing 60 Minutes, and they're talking with one of the most high-ranked, heavy-hitting whistleblowers in American history. I will be stopping along the way for commentary, and here we go.
According to Joe Renassisi, one of the most important whistleblowers ever interviewed, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration's ability to keep addictive opioids off U.S. streets was derailed. Renassisi ran the DEA's Office of Diversion Control, the division that regulates and investigates the pharmaceutical industry. Renassisi tells the inside story of how the opioid crisis was allowed to spread, aided by Congress, lobbyists, and a drug distribution industry that shipped almost unchecked hundreds of millions of pills to rogue pharmacies and pain clinics, providing the rocket fuel for a crisis that over the last 2 decades has claimed 200,000 lives.
So I just want to ask again, the people that say, oh, you're just paranoid, this is some kind of a conspiracy theory, blah, 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 the FDA, the drug companies, what about the science? What about that? Well, again, the facts is that the FDA is as crooked as this particular whistleblower says.
According to Joe Renassisi, one of the most important whistleblowers ever interviewed.
One of the most important ever interviewed. This is especially going down into the ear holes of the naysayers. And I know you're listening because we've been getting the feedback from some that do. What are you going to say about this? Okay, this is the FDA. This isn't some stupid website in the middle of no place that you can try to discredit while they run a story that's true from the New York Times. But if it's true in the New York Times, that's fine. But if it's on the website, it's not. Okay, that group of people, bogus website people, spewers. I mean, you think everything that's true on all the mainstream, nothing is 100% true. Yeah, I know you're thinking, oh, this show's not 100% true. No, it isn't, because I pre-recorded some things. But the essence of the show is true. I was sick and now I'm not. You want to learn how to do that, or you want to send stupid emails of anger? Let's hear this again, man.
According to Joe Renassisi, one of the most important whistleblowers ever interviewed, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration's ability to keep addictive opioids off U.S. streets was derailed.
Deliberately derailed by this guy. Now, who is this Joe Renassisi guy? Who are we talking about? It's pretty funny that we don't know who that is yet. Let's find out.
Renassisi tells the inside story of how the opioid crisis was allowed to spread, aided by Congress, lobbyists, and a drug distribution industry that
allowed to spread by everyone in frigging government and the drug industry. And yet I have to listen to people say that these beliefs that I have, these hunches that are completely baseless about medicine, and that's where this ties into. These are the same people that tell you need to do these other things like chemotherapy or you're going to die. There's nothing else to do. We have to do this. We have to take this procedure. Why do you think they say get a second opinion? God, I did. I wouldn't be here without it. These people pull off all kinds of shit, and it is for money, and it does make the world go around. And it's funny to me that people still weigh in on the side of, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. There's no way that's really happening to you, even though you were there witnessing it happen, all the documentation. And the guy in government, the heavy hitter at the DEA who was trying to bust these people who put the friggin' opioids on the street, that Canada is now convening with all of their politicians to try to sit around and scratch their heads and figure out, what are we going to do? Well, if I was the one providing them to the street, you'd be arresting me for making them and distributing them. So what is your fucking problem that you can't just go to these companies and shut them down? I don't know why you can't, but you can't, because everybody's in on it. And that sounds paranoid too, but I'll be shown to be true about that before this particular audio soundbite has come to an end.
That shipped almost unchecked hundreds of millions of pills to rogue pharmacies and pain clinics, providing the rocket fuel for a crisis that over the last 2 decades has claimed 200,000 lives.
200,000 lives and nothing happens to them. I give somebody a joint in Canada under the new laws, I'm going to do 14 years in jail. The people designing systems such as this are mentally deficient. It's beyond cruel. It's stupid, for sure. There's no question about how stupid it is. But it's nothing but a pack of lies. It's an oppressive pack of lies designed to repress the health and will of the majority of the people. Do you hear me ringing a bell here? How the fuck do these people think they can get away with this? Oh yeah, no one really knows the truth. People attack people that find the truth because they don't want to believe that it could be anything else than what they were told, because that saves them doing the research and they can throw their hands up in the air and say, oh well. It's time to learn that lesson. They really do have a criminally heavy FDA, government, and pharmaceutical big company system. I know that sounds like a bunch of shit. That's how they get away with it.
This is an industry that's out of control. What they want to do is do what they want to do and not worry about what the law is.
Well, I understand that. On that point, I can see what they're saying. I wanted to do what I wanted to do, which was to use this oil to save my life. Rick Simpson oil, brought to you by the cagey, fun, crafty mind of Rick Simpson. Rick Simpson oil, helping you with cancer beyond what you've been told in the mainstream press. Stick around for our next segment called Medium Mulch. The Globe and Mail put an article out recently about cannabis and cancer, and I'm going to tear that fucking thing apart as soon as we're done with this. All right. And if you're listening at home, this is where it may start to get gross once in a while, so hopefully you've already had your lunch and the kids are back to school. All right, here we go.
And if they don't follow the law in drug supply, people die. That's just it. People die.
Joe Renassisi is a tough, blunt former DEA Deputy Assistant Administrator with a law degree, a pharmacy degree, and a smoldering rage at the unrelenting death toll from opioids. His greatest ire is reserved for the distributors, some of them multi-billion-dollar Fortune 500 middlemen that ship the pain pills from manufacturers like Purdue Pharma and Johnson & Johnson to drugstores all over the country.
Purdue Pharma, Johnson & Johnson, McKesson, these are the people making these drugs. What's the matter with you? Bayer? Apotex? Figure out who's making these fucking drugs and putting them on the street. Drugs that we were told were going to be safe by the industry that I'm going up against, by the industry that I'm being told I'm wrong to argue with. 20 years ago almost, there was a chump liar. I'm going to call him a liar. I really don't think he was mistaken. Money was at hand when this punk sat down and ushered in the era of accepting opioids as a viable option that really wasn't going to affect too many people. These people don't know what they're talking half the time, except for how to make up a bunch of lies to make money. Coffee. Here we go. I do love my coffee. I'm still addicted to something, I guess. All right, back to these liars.
Fueling the opioid epidemic by turning a blind eye to pain pills being diverted to illicit use.
These are the people making vaccines too, folks, okay? So we're not going to get into the vaccine debate on this show because that just drives people nuts and it takes forever, and it is a great topic, and there's a lot of information to be shared and revealed on both sides of that issue. But this isn't it. But I'm just saying, the same people that are making these opioids, these same manufacturers with ethics in the basement, they don't even register on the scale. They already knew people were going to die. They already knew they were going to profit by the millions. And we're supposed to believe them 100%. So they're just doing that with opioids. They're just being complete poison artists and criminals with opioids. That's the only place they're doing it. They're not doing it at all with vaccines. There's 100% clarity of production in vaccines. 100% monitor. Everything's fine there. Don't worry. It's only about the opioids. Yeah, right. Same people, folks. Same people.
This is an industry that allowed millions and millions of drugs to go into bad pharmacies and doctors' offices that distributed them out to people who had no legitimate need for those drugs. The three largest distributors are Cardinal Health, McKesson, and AmerisourceBergen. They control probably 85 or 90% of the drugs going downstream.
Why is this? I just belched. Did you hear that? That was so gross, but I did warn you about grossness beforehand. Why is it that this guy can sit here and tell us exactly who is making these poisonous things, who is propagating them around the countries, who is selling them and profiting from them? How does a government need to convene to sit around to figure out what are we going to do about the opioid crisis? Because if they were worried about one person getting poisoned, say at a bar, like the beautiful Pacific Junction Hotel at 234 King Street East, let's just say someone was sitting at the bar over there. And let's say I didn't care about them or I didn't want them to be around anymore. And let's say I took a little sleeve, a little tiny bit of turpentine or some other similar poison and put it into their drink. And let's say they got sick. And or let's say they died. And there was a videotape playing because of the camera in the bar. And it showed me putting one glass worth of poison into one person's body. I would be charged. I would have to be charged with, at the very least, criminal negligence, perhaps manslaughter, perhaps murder, first-degree murder, premeditated murder, perhaps, most likely. That's what the lawyer of the one person who suffered from that attack would come after me for, but we have to sit here through Fukushimas? Who has gone to jail from Fukushima? We have to sit through Deepwater Horizon. Now there's another one. These oil spills all over the country, and these sickening people at the top of these corporate pyramids are looking down on everyone else and looking into the profits of being able to put together a system of death that at the one hand, people will say, oh, you better listen to this guy. He knows what he's talking about, this doctor, this company of drug purveyors. And we have evidence that that's not the case. We have evidence that they have damaged the healthful being of the body politic. Yeah, it's not smooth. I'm tripping over my words here. It's really friggin' upsetting to me to realize this shit every day. That these monsters are given license to make profits and cause us to get sick while they're pretending to make us better and telling everybody else that doesn't believe in their corporate manifesto that they're paranoid conspiracy theorists. Well, I don't see how anyone with a clue can listen to these things and research the things that I've looked at and what we're revealing here from 60 Minutes and think it's anything better than that. Okay? Again, I know who is responsible for the opioid crisis. No one in the government contacts me to ask about it. Why would they? I'd provide them with the fact and shut down the questioning, and then they don't have lunch in a hotel flight somewhere and a rendezvous to sit around and dream up a bunch of nonsense and eat fantastic cannabis while they try to pretend to come up with a solution for a drug crisis that's out of control. Shut down the people making it. If I were making something illegal and poisoning people, you'd shut me down, you'd shut anybody down, and so you should. Where is this? What is the one key? The key point that keeps people in government not shutting down operations like this? There must be some connector somewhere. There has to be. Doesn't make sense otherwise.
Middlemen that ship the pain pills from manufacturers like Purdue Pharma
Yeah.
and Johnson & Johnson.
Purdue
to
Pharma,
drugstores
Johnson
all
&
over
Johnson,
the country,
criminals.
fueling the opioid epidemic.
Fueling
by
the
turning a
opioid
blind
epidemic.
eye to
Turning a
pain
blind
pills
eye to
being diverted
painkillers.
to illicit use.
This is an industry that allowed millions and millions of drugs to go into bad pharmacies and doctors' offices that distributed them out to people who had no legitimate need for those drugs. The three largest distributors are Cardinal Health, McKesson, and AmerisourceBergen. The three largest distributors are Cardinal Health, McKesson, and AmerisourceBergen. They control probably 85 or 90% of the drugs going downstream.
85 or 90%? Why aren't the police cars at the head office?
These big companies knew that they were pumping drugs into American communities, killing people.
That's not an implication, that's a fact. That's exactly what they did.
Okay, so when you hear about these people criticizing cannabis and cannabis use and cancer use, they will say things like, some tests have shown that cannabis may be responsive to some types of limited response and potential cancers. I mean, can you take all the limiters off of it? You're just saying it doesn't work, and you're couching your language when you have a guy who specifically on point says, without mussing around, he gets right to it. Here it is again.
These big companies knew that they were pumping drugs into American communities, killing people.
That's not an implication, that's a fact. That's exactly what they did.
In the late 1990s, opioids like oxycodone and hydrocodone became a routine medical treatment for chronic pain. Drug companies assured doctors and congressional investigators, as in this 2001 hearing, that the pain medications were effective and safe.
Addiction is not common. Addiction is rare in the pain patient who's properly managed.
Okay, that's one of the main doctors. I can't remember his name. This isn't a news show. This is a podcast about getting access to cannabis. But yeah, this is a heavy hitter up in the a doctor, somebody or other, on the payroll of these big corporations, sitting down in front of the folks at Congress or the Senate, perhaps in 1999 or 2001. Anyway, a long time ago. Anyway, it's the very testimony that precipitated this crisis. Anyway, I'm sure this man is very well paid off. What did he say again?
Drug companies assured doctors and congressional investigators, as in this 2001 hearing, that the pain medications were effective and safe.
Addiction is not common. Addiction is rare in the pain patient who's properly managed.
Okay, so that is a lying doctor with a lot of power who's connected to the pharmaceutical industry saying such a thing. That's a lying doctor. That's a doctor who was lying. And if he wasn't lying, he was so far mistaken that it's also criminal that his suggestions of proliferation of these opiates were going to do anything, not to shrink tumors, but to fatten wallets of the people that sell these fucking toxins. Why isn't anybody else as upset about this? Why isn't anybody else just calling these people up and saying, you're responsible for the opioid crisis? I don't know. Let's just pick on the folks that are trying to help you get out of your own personal pain spiral. I don't understand it. The criminal standing right in front of you. You don't even seem to know why there's a crisis, and the purveyors are right there on television. This is not hard to figure out. It's just it's hard for some people to believe that they have been believing such a series of lies. Everyone goes through that, I guess.
Common. Addiction is rare in the pain patient who's properly managed.
With many doctors convinced the drugs posed few risks, prescriptions skyrocketed, and so did addiction. Many people who had become addicted to painkillers turned to shady pill mills, pain clinics with rogue doctors to write fraudulent prescriptions.
Hey, that sounds like a bunch of paranoid bullshit. Remember when you thought that everybody in the doctor world and everybody in the pharmaceutical world was some kind of friggin' saint? Have a listen.
Many people who had become addicted to painkillers turned to shady pill mills, pain clinics with rogue doctors to write fraudulent prescriptions, and complicit pharmacists to fill them. One-stop shopping for controlled narcotics.
Controlled narcotics. That's also what the Ontario government wants to do. It's in the word, the Liquor Control Board, the Cannabis Control Board. They want to control everything. These people control things right into the ground, into criminality.
Pain clinics overnight popping up off an entrance ramp or an exit ramp on an interstate. And all of a sudden there's a pain clinic there.
Had you ever seen anything like that before?
Never. It was my opinion that this made the whole crack epidemic look like nothing. These weren't kids slinging crack on the corner. These were professionals who were doing it.
The guy says it makes the crack epidemic look like nothing. Remember how many people they arrested and how much of a nightmare the media made out of the crack epidemic? And I'm not saying it wasn't an epidemic, and I'm not saying they shouldn't have made a hay out of that. But this is worse. And they sit around scratching their heads going, let's retard the process of bringing cannabis into the field of awareness and acceptance and ease of ability to obtain it, even though it's a friggin' food from the beginning of time. And instead, let's let some chemical company agents put their poisons into the world by pretending and lying that they're healthful. And then 15, 20 years down the road, when a bunch of people have died and everybody's scratching their heads, we can pretend to solve the problem by talking about it at a convention. And once again, these are the thought processes from people with sober minds who never sully it with the terrible thing that is the substance of marijuana and green crush or hash or honey oil or all the other different wonderful, and the edibles too. God, I could use an edible right now. This is only a coffee and I don't have anything in it that's edible. But edibles are that's another way to take it in. Now I'm going into a commercial for various different ways to ingest cannabis. You know what I'm talking about. All kinds of different ways to ingest cannabis, and when you do that, you'll probably be in a state of mind where you don't need to have these criminal poisons that these lying government pigs have been telling us are the backbone of our healthcare system. I'll tell you what, as soon as everybody starts ingesting the proper amount of cannabis as a food from a long time ago, before they got sick, before they started smoking it, before they even knew what THC was, I'm talking about a lot of the other healthful properties in cannabis, you start taking that in as a food, you're not going to be as sick anymore. And we won't have a healthcare crisis where we need to find it. Yeah. Oh, it is money. Okay. All right. Never mind.
Looked like nothing. These weren't kids slinging crack on the corner. These were professionals who were doing it. They were just drug dealers in lab coats.
Drug dealers in lab
I watched
coats.
them get arrested, and I was the one who approved the cases.
Despite arrests of unscrupulous purveyors, opioids kept flooding the black market. The death toll kept rising. Prosecuting crooked doctors and pharmacists wasn't stemming the epidemic.
There had to be a choke point, and the choke point was the distributors. This was all new to us. We weren't seeing just some security violations and a few bad orders. We were seeing hundreds of bad orders.
Isn't that amazing? That's what this guy says there. I love this
part. There had to be a choke point, and the choke point was the distributors.
The choke point is the distributors. See, they call themselves distributors. That's what the big drug companies call the outlets where you obtain those drugs. The distributors. In that world, they are distributors. And in the world of cannabis, they are dealers and criminals. And yet no one has suffered the difficulties and the amounts of things that can go wrong with cannabis that these distributors of pharmaceuticals, and that's the decent term, are so much better and better people and nicer and smarter, sharper and honest and integrous people because they are businessmen with ties. And that's how you know they're telling the truth instead of realizing that they are criminals.
There had to be a choke point, and the choke point was the distributors.
The distributors, they're friggin' dealers. It's amazing how people use language to change and flip meanings around. Happens all the time. Oh, you can say one thing and have someone completely misinterpret that thing, and then they will deny that the misinterpretation was an inaccuracy, even though you were the one that was getting across the point of view. Does that sound familiar to people?
This was all new to us. We weren't seeing just some security violations and a few bad orders. We were seeing hundreds of bad orders that involved millions and millions of tablets. That's when we started going after the distributors.
A distributor's representative told us the problem is not distributors, but doctors who overprescribe pain medication. But the distributors know exactly how many pills go to every drugstore they supply, and they are required under the Controlled Substances Act to report and stop what the DEA calls suspicious orders, such as unusually large or frequent shipments of opioids.
Then check the numbers on this next one to see if this was unusually large or unusually frequent.
But DEA investigators say many distributors ignored that requirement.
They had a business plan. Their plan was to sell a lot of pills and make a lot of money.
How does that sound? What did you say? This is a DEA investigator, not some paranoid, left-wing, paranoid, afraid of the government, a person who believes everything a corporation says. This is a guy who is trying to do his job as an enforcement officer of someone that's introducing a poison into the mainstream. Listen to the frustration in his voice.
Their plan was to sell a lot of pills and make a lot of money.
They saw distributors shipping thousands of suspicious orders. One example, a pharmacy in Kermit, West Virginia, a town of just 392 people.
392 people, yeah, go ahead.
Ordered 9 million hydrocodone pills over 2 years.
392 people, 9 million hydrocodone. I mean, it sounds like a Rush Limbaugh family reunion.
All we were looking for is a good faith effort by these companies to do the right thing. And there was no good faith effort. Greed always trumped compliance.
Greed always trumps compliance.
It did every time. But don't sit here and tell me, well, we're not sure what a suspicious order is. Really? I mean, this pharmacy just bought 50 times the amount that a normal pharmacy purchases, and they're in a town of 5,000 people. You don't know that that's suspicious? I mean, at some point, you're just turning a blind eye to it.
These companies are a big reason for this epidemic.
Yeah, absolutely they are.
It's clear, folks. Like, it really is. What you need to do if you're really concerned about the opioid crisis, and maybe you've lost someone, or maybe you are someone, or maybe you know someone, pick up the phone and grab one of these pharmaceutical companies and call them out on it and tell them you're sick and tired of the fact that they're responsible for the opioid crisis. You don't like paying your tax dollars for politicians to sit around and convene a meeting to try to figure out what the hell went wrong when you already know what went wrong. Because on mainstream news, mainstream, CBS is telling you exactly what the hell happened.
With 100% accuracy that we were in there on multiple occasions trying to get them to change their behavior, and they just flat out ignored us.
In 2008, the DEA slapped McKesson, the country's largest drug distributor, with a $13.2 million fine.
Does anybody have any idea how tiny a $13.2 million fine is to a pharmaceutical behemoth? Anybody at all? That's like when you're walking to work and you're getting off the bus and you see a 25-cent piece of quarter rolling along the floor in Western society. It's not even worth the time to bend down and pick it up anymore, because you're going to get pushed from behind. It's going to be a hassle, and just that in itself isn't going to be worth the 25 cents. Same kind of thing here, I believe. I really do.
Penalized by the DEA for filling hundreds of suspicious orders, millions of pills. Over the last 7 years, distributors' fines have totaled more than $341 million.
Still a drop in the bucket, really, into a multi-billion-dollar industry. I mean, this is the cost of doing business. They're putting a premium on a few $100 million, and look at all the lives they've taken in that wake. I mean, what more do you need to understand? This is a very dark and sick system of dark people when they're profiting into the billions. They're paying fines of only millions of dollars, and they're still there, and we still don't know exactly why they continue to get away with this.
The companies cried foul and complained to Congress that DEA regulations were vague, and the agency was treating them like a foreign drug cartel. They wanted to work with the DEA.
That's what they
Effective
said.
enforcement, they wrote, must be a two-way street. The industry says you guys were unfair.
That's the 60 Minutes host talking to these other DEA agents who were, as they say, trying to do their job based on the information.
I'm allowed to say to people who lost their sons and daughters.
Unfair.
I'm allowed to say to people who lost their sons and daughters.
That was in a very emotional.
See how fair they think it is.
Agent who's upset about that.
In 2011, more than 17,000 Americans died from opioid prescription overdoses. Cardinal Health, the second largest distributor. In 2011, more than 17,000 Americans died from opioid prescription overdoses.
I wonder where I would be sitting right now if since 2011 I was responsible for 17,000 deaths. I wonder if I'd be sitting here right now talking. I don't think so.
Cardinal Health, the second largest distributor, started pushing back. The company's attorneys went over his head and called his bosses at the Justice Department, who called in Ranasisi to have him explain his tactics.
It infuriated me that I was over there trying to explain what my motives were or why I was going after these corporations. I just got questioned on why we're doing what we're doing. This is war. We're going after these people, and we're not going to stop.
It's war. See, the DEA is going after the drug companies, and they're the same drug companies that I've been having a difficulty with, and that a lot of people that suffer a lot of different conditions are having difficulty with because they fall into an addiction trap, which is how these particular drugs are designed and synthesized to create. There's no better way to create a repeat customer than to make sure the product is addictive. And we know this from iPhones, and we know this from sugary cereals, and we know this from these drug companies who are nowhere near the paragons of virtue that they claim to be.
You were getting this pushback because you were going after Fortune 500 companies?
I have no doubt in my mind. Why would it be any different for these companies as compared to the small mom and pops that we had done hundreds of times before? They have a lot of money and a lot of influence.
A lot of money and a lot of influence, a.k.a. you're paranoid if you believe they're doing anything wrong.
And that's the difference.
The drug industry used that money and influence to pressure top lawyers at the DEA to take a softer approach. It divided the litigation office. In 2013, a sea change in the way prosecutions of big distributors were handled. Cases once easily approved now weren't good enough.
We had been
Wait till you hear this.
achieving incredible success
In busting
an almost
them.
unstoppable wave.
In busting the companies, yeah.
And then suddenly it stopped.
What happened?
These were not cases where it was black, where it was gray. These were cases where the evidence was crystal clear that there was wrongdoing going on.
Then what happened?
His bosses started to bog down the system, demanding ever more evidence.
This is again coming
3
from
undercovers by 4 officers over 3 months. That wouldn't be enough.
the organization you're listening to here is the DEA trying to bust drug companies that are errantly providing toxic substances for people to deliberately get hung up on so they could make billion-dollar profit margins, if that breaks it down enough for you.
Maybe we need an expert to explain how recording equipment works.
Those are some of the regulations they needed to deal with. That's what the drug company would say. Well, we need to know how your recording equipment works before we comply with it.
Maybe we need an expert to explain the system for prescribing. What's a prescription?
Suddenly, he said, he ran into roadblocks from one of attorney Jonathan Novak's bosses.
I spent a year working on this case. I send it down there, and it's never good enough. Every time I talk to this guy, he wants something else. And I get it for him, and that's still not good enough. You know, and this goes on and on and on. And when these roadblocks get thrown up in your face, at that point, you know they just don't want the case.
Do you tell a DEA officer he's being paranoid? Do you tell a DEA officer that he's making it up?
The DEA's toughest sanction is to freeze distributors' shipments of narcotics, a step they haven't taken in almost 2 years.
So they can freeze the shipments, but apparently they can't stop them from making the poison that's getting shipped.
At the height of the opioid epidemic, inexplicably, they slowed down.
The
One
arrests.
big reason for the slowdown,
That's what he's saying.
DC's notorious revolving door.
Ah, here we go with the reasons now. Washington, D.C.'s revolving door between the FDA and the pharmaceutical free world, the free corporate world. What these fucking people do is this. They get a job either in government or at the FDA or something like that of that nature, and they learn the insides and outsides of the system of drug distribution. And how the drug companies profit is something you're well aware of when you're in the government side regulating that industry. And what you do at that point is you keep on calling the shots and saying, we are going to make sure that we are going to take down these drug companies, and the drug companies will comply with our series of laws that we're putting down in the government so that nobody gets hurt, nobody gets injured. That's what the government says. And then the folks inside the company have to deal with the government regulations. And they usually can't. So they get a hold of someone in the government putting those regulations upon them, and they hire them. It's like a double agent. First you're on one team, and then you're on the other team. This has been going on for a long time. This is not a delusional paranoia. This is the way of the world. If you think this is stunning, you've been deluded. And you should be a little more paranoid. Paranoia is not something that exists for no reason. It's definitely something you want to have to a certain percentage. Not out of control like some crazy person. But and that's probably not okay for me to say that in today's identity politics. A crazy person. But it's a word and I'm going to use it. These people are criminals on several different levels, and these people influence government to write laws that prevent folks to have access to these cannabinoids. Because when these cannabinoids are fully available and when people realize how healthful they are as a property, they're not going to be making billions of dollars down here at Criminal City, USA. These companies that are mentioned earlier, scroll back if you need to hear them. Johnson & Johnson and these other McKesson. Criminals. Full on. Send your lawyer. So we're getting to the end of this.
Novak said he saw a parade of DEA lawyers switch sides and jump to high-paying jobs defending the drug industry.
That's the whole story right there. Okay.
Saw a parade of DEA lawyers switch sides and jump to high-paying jobs defending the drug industry. Once they'd made the leap, they lobbied their former colleagues
and told them
and argued the DEA's cases were weak and ultimately would lose in court. It had a chilling effect on DEA litigators.
Some of the best and brightest former DEA attorneys are now on the other side and know all of the weak points. Their fingerprints are on memos and policy and emails going out where you see this concoction of what they might argue in the future.
You and the other attorneys had been winning these cases.
All of the time.
The Justice Department is the agency that oversees the DEA. A senior attorney at the department at the time told us in a statement, Department of Justice leadership was not advised that DEA had changed enforcement strategies.
Yeah, so they don't want to do that. They want to keep everything as murky as possible so that these people can possibly make even more money than ever before while causing other people to believe that if you don't fully trust the pharmaceutical cartel, you're a paranoid idiot and you're eschewing science and telling people that they are crazy for understanding that the truth for survival really lies in the alternative. As opposed to these terrible ideas that are coming out of these companies to make these horrible toxins. Let's remember that when you manufacture any kind of chemical agent, a pharmaceutical, the manufacture of that thing is going on in a secret room that's walled off with steel and white and glass and people wearing hoods and coats, and no one really knows what's going on in the creation of those drugs, those elements. So that's the end of our segment there, and I, for some reason, wrapped it up with Oh Canada. But right now, we're going to take in a quick news roundup before we have to get going. Some quick stories for you. There was a raid in Tobique. That's an area in our eastern section of the country. Ross Purley says First Nation band sees an RCMP raid on tribal relief as an attack on sovereignty. Listen to these punks. Tribal Relief, of course, it's R-E and then capital L-E-A-F. This is on the CBC website. And they tried to shut down a native-run dispensary. Oh, God. Ross Purley says Tribal Relief, which opened in July, is 51% owned by the band and has the full support of band council as a pain management center. Hey, they don't have opioids in there. We're sick and tired of doctors and pharmacists shoving opioids down the throats of our people paid for by Health Canada, he said. So this is a way for people to get the medicine they need to try and live happy, peaceful lives. That's right. That sounds like a pretty good plan. What could have been the problem? Purley said the marijuana can help people in the community with medical conditions such as cancer and post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as those trying to kick addictions to opioids and other narcotics. And the band's share of revenue goes back to the community, everything from programs for youth and assistance for the elderly, something that is very difficult to obtain from the official Canadian government, to helping the unemployed and finding jobs and infrastructure projects. It's only been a couple of months, but Purley said the initiative has been good for the community. In other words, most people want it. In other words, that's the reason the government wants to shut it down in this sham of what we call a democracy. And that's why there was such a strong show of support during the police raid. About 100 members in several vehicles blocked officers from leaving for a number of hours. It was peaceful and no weapons were involved. but the situation was delicate. The search and seizure by police was viewed as a disrespectful attack. Oh, God, I can't imagine that from some cops. On the band's sovereignty. Luckily, me and my counsel were able to negotiate the safe release. Basically, we avoided a full-out conflict and crisis in our community, and they did that by telling the government to go away. Purley declined to disclose any details about the negotiations, but did say charges against 3 arrested employees were dropped. We strongly believe in self-government and self-determination. Thanks. We regulate and license our own gaming, our own alcohol, and our own tobacco, and our own marijuana, and we do it efficiently. So you can tell this guy's not in government if he says he's doing it efficiently. The RCMP, who say they won't be ready for Canada's new legalization plans. The RCMP contend the dispensary located on Route 105 in northwestern New Brunswick is illegal. Heavens. Gives a shit what the cops think. No charges have been laid, and the investigation is continuing. Spokesperson Corporal Julie Rogers Marsh said, police are trying to determine who is supplying the shop. And I would try to determine, why don't the police sit the hell down and have a snack and then go bust somebody that's doing something illegal? Purley declined to disclose the identity of the supplier or the names of the other part owners because he didn't want them to suffer the wrath of the law either. Good for him. All I'll say, he says, is that we have the educational capacity and sophistication to do proper quality control and regulation. He said the RCMP, why would they focus on a marijuana dispensary when the community is struggling with narcotics such as opioids, fentanyl, and cocaine, particularly when the federal government is expected to legalize recreational marijuana by next year? People are sick, they're dying on these other drugs. And for us, that's what the RCMP should be focusing on. Yes! If you're listening to this as an RCMP member, please call in and tell me why this is okay to do. These folks have been asking them to do something about it. They've done absolutely nothing about the crises, and instead they go after the cannabis. They're fucking idiots. When you have the support of the leadership and you have the support of the community to raid other real drug dealers, and you're not doing it, and you're wasting your time and your resources on something that's supported by leadership and by the community, I mean, it just doesn't make sense at all, he says. She said she couldn't speak about other enforcement efforts ongoing. There are different investigations at different stages. At different stages, yeah. Well, stick to the fentanyl. Stick to those opioids. And when you find them, look at the label on it and see where it came from. And then went to the place that made it. Go to the place that made the stupid thing and charge them with it. Why are you charging everybody? Why are you charging everybody with this kind of thing? I don't understand. I mean, I do, but I'm being facetious. I just want to know why that's happening. I want to mention that I was mentioned as a person of note by the International Center for Science and Drug Policy. They've been listening to the show. That's icsdp.org. And they know what I've been talking about, and so I'm glad to say that the International Center for Science and Drug Policy is somehow on their website someplace featuring my videos and some of the links to these shows, Green Crush, which you're listening to right now. And where was I? Oh, yeah, the opioid crisis. Right. So I'm afraid things aren't going to get too much better until more people know about exactly what's going on here. Big Pharma does have connections in Congress. Congress has been protecting drug companies when the opioid crisis has worsened. These people have been manufacturing poisonous substances that ruin people's lives. They have been found guilty of deceit over marketing, and that was a fascinating article to read, that in Abington, Virginia, the company that makes OxyContin, the painkiller opioid, and its 3 current and former executives pleaded guilty in federal court to criminal charges that it misled doctors and patients when it claimed the drug was less likely to be abused than traditional narcotics. Purdue Pharma agreed to pay $600 million in fines and other payments to resolve the criminal charge of misbranding the product. a pretty large amount, one of the largest ever paid by a drug company. 3 executives, its president, its top lawyer, also pleaded guilty to misdemeanor charges of misbranding the drug and agreed to pay a paltry sum for a pharmaceutical company of $34.5 million in fine. I feel like I could shoot someone with a gun across the street and then drop like $100 down and be on my way. I feel like that's how easy that is. The guilty plea by Purdue Frederick, an affiliate of Purdue Pharma, is the latest in a number of cases brought by the Justice Department against the pharmaceutical makers that accuse them of misbranding, a broad state statute that makes it a crime to put false or misleading information about a drug on its label or in ads to promote it for unapproved use. Another company, Bristol Myers Squibb, pleaded guilty to making false statements to the government involving its anti-clotting medicine Plavix. And all of this was going on as far back as May 11, 2007. This is a 10-year-old article. And so if you're in government propagating laws and systems and drug distribution rules, you are complicit in this criminality. You're the getaway driver of the bank robbers. You're a punk, and you're on a lobbyist's tit, making in extra money while putting people in peril because you are deceitfully marketing a poisonous substance. And I said this article was 10 years old, and they're only now in Canada trying to figure this out. Listen to this thing. I mean, this is... I don't know what to say about this one. This is Canada for you. I live here. This is where the show is centered in Toronto. The health implications of legalized cannabis and ways to combat Canada's rising opioid problem are on the agenda. That's not the same topic, but they're on the agenda when health ministers meet in the Albertan capital. Provincial and territorial ministers are holding discussions to get an update on the marijuana file from federal counterpart Jeanette Pettipas-Taylor. Pettipas? I don't know. Manitoba Health Minister Kevin Gertson says he wants to know more about the impacts of health and on the health system. Many studies show that people are affected by the consumption of marijuana up until the age of 25 because there can be long-term effects if the brain is still developing up until that age. So thank God we have a series of rules and a series of corporate structures back and forth that were created with the clarity of no drug use whatsoever in the mind, nothing at all to change the opinion, to leave us in the mess we're in today, where we know exactly why these people are addicted and why they're stuck on it and who put that poison out there, and none of them are going to jail. And 10-year-old articles are giving us the answers to the reasons why people are so sick today. And somehow or other, my Canadian tax dollars, the people that put all of that together, are going to sit around and have a fantastic lunch and already know the answer, or are too stupid to realize that the answer sits before them. These are the folks that we're supposed to listen to. Thank you, CBC. Absolutely incredible. All right. We're getting close to the end of this. I can see my engineer is getting itchy. We have 12 medical marijuana producers coming together to form a cannabis cooperative. Things are happening. The folks in the business know what's going on. We don't need idiots in government trying to ape what was already working, just the template of distribution. We don't need that anymore because even Canada is rolling back its airport security to stop calling the police on passengers carrying prescription pot. You imagine that? You're flying around, you got a prescription for opioids, no problem. You had pot, they pull you over and talk to you for a long time. They're finally rolling that back now. On the CBC as well, the Canadian airport security screeners have stopped calling the police every time they process a passenger traveling with medical marijuana. CATSA, the Canadian Air Transport Security Agency, changed its policy after an exponential growth in the number of passengers with prescription pot in their carry-on luggage. Good. Sit down. Shut up, CATSA. But honestly, were you also pulling these people? Were you also calling the police when they had opioids in their bag? I think not. So it's getting really frustrating out here with this ridiculous crisis that's going on while we do so know who is responsible for it, while we pretend we don't, while we shit all over cannabis as a thing to get you out of that jam. I mean, I'm so tired of it, I can't even explain it. So, on that note, let me just remind you all why I get into this rut of fury. Next week, I am going to absolutely shred the bullshit that came spewing forth from the Globe and Mail this week. The Globe and Mail seems to not know that the Guardian newspaper in England in 2001, the mainstream Guardian newspaper in England in 2001, put out an article about cancer and cannabis. And if you don't know this article, you should. I send it to a lot of people. Because it's a mainstream article and because it does not deal in the bullshit of these governments. It doesn't say maybe, kind of, sort of, might work, etc. It says it really does work. It says that the science has been settled already. It says what I'm about to read you. I'm going to just cue up the closing theme here so we can get out of here. And listen to this. The first clinical trials of the drug reveal cannabis is capable of radically transforming the lives of very sick people. Cannabis is a wonder drug capable of radically transforming the lives of sick people, according to results of clinical trials sanctioned by the government, proving more successful than anyone had imagined. Though still illegal for many to prescribe when this article was written 16 years ago. Taking the drug, still illegal for doctors to prescribe, has allowed a man previously so crippled with pain that he was impotent, and he was able to become a father. Claims of the drug, of the benefits of the drug for certain conditions, have been anecdotal. That's the word we still hear today. Even this morning I read that somewhere. But the preliminary results of the UK government trial started in 2000 suggest that 80% of those taking the part have derived more benefit from cannabis than any other drug, with many describing it as miraculous. And if you don't take this into consideration, Canada, with your new series of drug laws coming out next year, you are going to see a wall of resistance like you have never imagined before. Because more and more people are starting to realize this thing. You're putting the vaulted manufacturers of toxic poisons that kill people on a pedestal. You're telling everybody else you don't know why and how this opioid crisis exists, and you are lying, and you will not be getting away with this. You put out a shitty vape law, Ontario, back in the year 2015. It was shitty because we didn't know it was coming. You didn't tell us about it at all. And then we were able to use vapes on the patios. They put that law out there here in Ontario. That was a law where medical cannabis users could use the vaping, and the people that were using those vapes, well, they were freaking out. So thrilled to know that the government was finally getting it. And instead, they weren't. They weren't getting it at all, because the very next day they pulled that law back in. They said, oops, we made a mistake. We got a couple of phone calls from a couple of people, and apparently that system's not going to work, so we're rescinding the freedom of being able to use medical cannabis outside. We're going to decide you're not allowed to use this stuff because the framework of our law, apparently it's unsound. Well, if you thought the vape law was unsound, the current structures of both the Ontario government system and the federal government system are no good. Here's some food for thought. The reason why cannabinoids appear to cure so many illnesses is because prior to prohibition, they were part of the human food chain. Dairy cows ate feral hemp, high in CBDs, and that was passed down through the humans, to the humans, through the milk. Pigs, chickens, and others also fed hemp and CBDs, and that was in meat and eggs. And in 1937, the government eradicated it, and now we're all sick.